Those who won our independence believed that the menace to freedom was an inert people, that public discourse is a political duty, and that the fitting remedy to evil counsels is good ones. Welcome back to Crayon Box Weekly.
Where we color outside the lines and cut through the noise.
I'm Carl.
I'm Avery.
Let's get started.
Today's protest rights continue to evolve as courts grapple with digital assembly and new public safety concerns. The historical trajectory shows that while the right to protest is fundamental, it exists within a constitutional framework that balances individual liberty with societal needs.
So last week, last week we talked about the history. Like we went from before the United States existed all the way to the civil rights era. So what we're going to do this week is we're going to kind of talk about post 9/11, and we're going to go all the way through to present day to the best we can. And the first thing, like the shaping focus of the modern day or 9/11 era and to now were the terrorist attacks on September 11th, which are happening this month, or not happening, but which we are remembering this month. But it triggered something that has happened throughout history, and that triggering was a fear of some outside power coming to threaten the way that we live. And that fear resulted in the insane transferring of our liberties and rights to the government in exchange for security. And that the first part of that looked like the US Patriot Act that was passed in 2001. Now, I was in high school back then. I was a freshman, so I cheered this because I didn't really know what it was. And then as a junior intel Marine, when I joined the Marine Corps in 2004, I discovered that this Patriot Act was this tool that allowed us to share intel, right? To share information. And that one of the biggest flaws to September 11th was the fact that the agencies and the local law enforcement organizations, they weren't talking, they weren't communicating. They didn't have that ability to share information. And so a lot of things got missed, which happens, right? But here's the unintended consequences that came out of it. When the Patriot Act was created, it created fusion centers. Seems like a good idea. It's where information can go up into these fusion centers and allow for federal and state and local authorities to communicate and work and fuse their information together. But what it also did is it created avenues for investigators to launch investigations into specific categories of people. In 2017, the FBI established the Black Identity Extremist designator for individuals who were of African American descent and who were frequently protesting. And there are facts that actually get into this and talk about how not only did they create this Black Identity Extremist moniker, but they also investigated African American protesters far more heavily and to the detriment of investigations into the white protests and the white threats and the far right threats that came out of the white nationalist movement. Got less attention, which allowed them to grow kind of in the shadows. In addition to that, the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security, by the end of the 2010s, were using drones and planes and Joint Terrorism Task Force to monitor all protests, including the Black Lives Matter protests in 2015 and in 2020. So, I mean, the Patriot Act was this thing that was it was designed to allow for communication from local to federal. But what it did instead is it broke down barriers that allowed for the expansion of government overreach and government authority and the erosion of our right to protest and our right to dissent against the government.
Yeah, that's pretty much how that went. And it's crazy to think about how far we've come from 9/11. I was a freshman in high school when 9/11 happened, and just thinking about it now, and I'm like, man, you're right. We didn't see protests up until shock and awe. Like that's when, we started seeing protests about
Mm-hmm.
things and the fear and all of that. So it's I do remember a lot of things about this, but I also remember a lot of the fear and the scare. It always seems to be, hey, let's secure you, but you know what? I'm just gonna put you in a little cage a little bit further. So yeah, totally get it. I totally
Yeah, I
agree.
mean, you had like, if you think about it, there was the protests when we started finding out what the government was doing, especially in Guantanamo and waterboarding and the
Oh my
enhanced
God, yeah.
interrogation procedures, right? So those things, when we found out about them, we protest. We not we. I was still a kid.
We did not.
Yeah, but they were protested actively, and it was those things that resulted in the the overextension of government power. Now, we really didn't see the government overtly overextending itself until, and I
I remember we
until
protest.
the first Trump term. Honestly, we really didn't see the overbroad, overbearing actions of the federal government until 2017, when President Trump
Yeah.
took his oath of office the first time, right? And something I didn't know about was the January 20th inauguration cases, right? And that was when 200 plus anti-Trump protesters were arrested and charged with felonies under conspiracy theory laws. I had no idea that even
But they weren't.
existed. Like,
That's because they weren't doing anything criminally. I want to say
right,
negligent. They just kind of
they
fizzled.
didn't break into anything. They didn't break into the Capitol. They weren't chanting "Hang Mike Pence." They weren't talking about ending the lives of people who went against them or overthrowing the government. Like, none of that happened. So maybe that's why it flew under the radar. But that was the first instance. And then after that, you had the George Floyd protests, which broke out. And I mean, those protests turned into riots, hands down riots. I mean, Avery, you and I were working on Sparta with a number of individuals that we were advocates with. One of them, Tanya Dunbar, and I was young, I was dumb, and I told Tanya, and I was like, listen, I don't understand why they're rioting because none of this makes sense to me. Because when we're rioting and you're out there and you're tearing things apart, you're taking away from your message. And Tanya and I, we butted heads, and I think that was the last time we really had a solid conversation.
Did she tell you she was going to throw punch
She
you?
did tell me
Because
she
it
was
wasn't a
gonna throw
con.
punch
It
me.
wasn't. I
Absolutely.
was like, it's not a conversation unless she tells you.
Yeah.
I swear to God, every conversation was, you know what? If you don't shut the fuck up, I'm gonna throw
Yep.
punch you. Well, okay. She goes, I will reach across this computer screen and I will pull you over here and I'm gonna throat punch
Yep.
you. All right, fair enough. I apologize.
Absolutely.
My bad.
But what I'll say there is that she may she rest in peace. She passed away shortly after that conversation. I think it was like a year after that conversation. I still hadn't made amends with her. The thing to note here is that as I grew and as I learned, I started to realize that she's not wrong, and these people who are protesting are not wrong. The riots are just the natural progression, the natural evolution of what happens when a group of people who have followed the law, who have gone through the right processes and procedures, are consistently getting ignored, are protesting in the streets and still getting ignored, are getting killed by police because of overbearing and overbroad actions by police officers. All of those things, they just build and they build and they build until eventually the anger and the frustration and the fear and the desperation to get their voice heard comes out in a violent manner. And I'm not saying that riots are good and that protesting with violence is good. I'm not saying that at all. But at some point, we have to recognize that some of these things that are happening, these bad things that are happening, are the direct result of a government that is unwilling to listen.
For those listening and seeing, I would like to stop and ask you to give us the difference between the riots that had happened then and the insurrection, because there's a huge difference. And I know people are going to go, hey, people had the same arguments for Jan 6 that you just gave. That's the devil's advocate in me saying, hey, this is what's being said. I'm not saying that that's what happened and that's the same,
right? And
but
we could
that's the
easily throw out the both sidesism argument, right? That we could do that all day
right.
long. But the reality is
100%.
that the people who attacked the Capitol on January 6th, not January 20th, January 6th, those individuals were of a group of people that had their voices heard on a consistent basis. They were a group of people who were always in power, and they took for granted the things that happened, and then they turned on the government when things didn't go their way, and they threw a gigantic fucking temper tantrum, right? Whereas the Black Lives Matter movement, the George Floyd protests, the Stonewall riots, right? All of those things were what happens when the government ignores a minority group of people and pushes them to do other things.
Right. And unfortunately, it's usually the marginalized communities like LGBTQ, the immigrants, the racial minorities, students now that consistently bear the brunt of those laws and controversies that we've been talking about, while powerful institutions like the state government, the federal government, corporations, law enforcement, they all benefit from all these things that are happening.
Absolutely. And they just grow in power, and they're not going to get rid of power. I mean, Portland 2020, right? Remember when they created the
Yeah.
autonomous zone in Portland?
Yeah.
God. Like, we have these good things and we have these bad things, right? I mean, you talk about before Portland, there was the whole Occupy movement. And the Occupy movement was this leaderless protest movement. And, well, if you don't have a leader, how the hell are you going to make sure that your demands and your protests are no one's going to take you seriously, bro. You don't have structure. And you're like this disparate thing, and you're embracing nothing. You're embracing chaos.
100%.
But the Portland situation, where the autonomous zone was established, you actually saw DHS go into Portland. And we saw precursors of what we're seeing being conducted by ICE today, which is DHS agents going in plain clothes, using secret police tactics where they would roll up in unmarked vans and utilize heavy crowd control weapons. And these unmarked vans would just roll up to protesters. It would stop. Agents would hop out of the back, grab the protester, throw him in the van, shut the door, and they would drive off, never to be seen again. Right? Like,
100%. Like,
gives me Russia mentality, KGB, like.
not even Russia, but like, during us playing in the sandbox, during different agencies just going up, taking a person, and again, not seen again. But that's unfortunately how that happens. But it shouldn't be happening on our own people.
Right. And, well, To that note, right, what I'll say is I think that what a lot of is going on now, what we see the government doing, what we see the fusion centers doing, the tactics that they are using, all of those things were learned in the sandbox, and those are
100%.
things that we learned and was institutionalized because it worked, right? Counterinsurgency operations was one of those things that taught us a lot about managing people and managing large groups of the public.
I just don't want to see the same enhanced jail time, I should say, or the enhanced prison that we saw, like with that. You got it. The name of the prison that we
Abu
made
Ghraib,
them pose
yeah,
butt ass
yeah.
naked. Yep, that one.
Well, I mean, comically,
Yeah,
we're kind of starting to see that pop up, right, with Alligator
not
Alcatraz.
really
Yeah,
I mean, not really comically, but yeah,
odd.
words matter.
Yeah, I guess it's not comically. I comically is my way of like tying things in, right? But it isn't
Right, right, right.
comically. And you're right, words matter. But interestingly, we're seeing that happen with places like
History repeats
Alligator
itself.
Alcatraz popping up in Florida. Comically, a judge ruled that the Alligator Alcatraz needed to be shut down because it was an environmental hazard because the area wasn't built to contain as many people as there were containing. So that is the
Well,
comical piece. Defeated by
he wants to. I'm
Go ahead.
sorry. He wants to restart Alcatraz itself. So
Yeah, I mean Pam Bondi went to visit there, I really had high hopes for Bondi. I was thinking that, she was going to be one of those reasonable, level-headed individuals.
no, I didn't. I didn't.
But turns out she's just as crazy and kooky as everyone else.
She's got stuff. She needs to wipe her mouth a little bit. That's all
but
I'm gonna say.
but I digress, right? So, but back to like what we saw. We also saw a precursor to the military pushing in, right?
Yes.
With Lafayette Square in
Yes.
2020, when President Trump wanted to cross the street and go to a church and hold a Bible up for a photo op,
Yep.
all because he wanted to
Yeah.
demonstrate that he has power and authority.
Yeah. Yeah. He is law and order. Is what it
Right.
was. Law and
Now,
order.
under Biden, the Pentagon reissued a Department of Defense directive, and we talked about this last year, which is the directive dealing with intelligence assets and how you can use them and governing the use of drones and supporting local law enforcement. And we talked about the concern that that was even there, or that line was even there, and that it was the secretary's responsibility and the secretary's role to determine whether or not they would support local law enforcement with these drones. Well, as of literally this month, we're starting to see DHS publish videos as part of their advertisement campaign of drone footage where they're actually monitoring the protests using military drones, predator drones that are they have weapons on them, and we're putting them up in the sky and we're using them to monitor our own people, right? So like where the
So
1960s saw a blossoming of the right to protest, what we're seeing now, especially in the later half of the post 9/11 era, is this tendency towards the federal government overreaching and tamping down on the protest rights of the American people.
I want to add two things. One, and this is just me kind of being a jerk, but did you see where Hegseth is making a ribbon, wants a ribbon for the deployment on the Mexican border?
Apparently, it's already been approved.
Yes. So I got anyway. So and when we talked about the drones last year, I was only okay with it if it was like, hey, we got a hostage situation. What does this look like inside? I'm cool with that. Not the, hey, let me spy on you because you're LGBTQ and I need to, harass you and because we're seeing that. Or, hey, if it's a life and death situation, fine, great with it. If it's just because you want to be a dick, I'm not here for it. That was even back in
And I
2020,
think that was you and I, like, I mean, literally last
not
the
2020,
last
last year.
season, 2024. We talked about that, and you and I both agreed, like, it was okay to an extent, and the DoD directive was okay to an extent because it had that separation. It was like the secretary's not going to do anything without the direction of the president. But what I don't think you and I fully understood was the fact that this new administration, the incoming administration,
Was gonna do its own people.
right? We were still in the Kamala is going to win, so it's not a big deal. But when Trump won and we saw things happening, all of a sudden it became very real that, the concerns that were brought forth by the MAGA side of things about government overreach with the drones is now become a very real threat, but on the Democrat side of things, against Democrats, against liberals, against protesters, against individuals who are speaking out against their government. It's okay for dissent to be squashed if it is not going to go there.
But I mean, I will say, if the drones are used for like surveillance of the border, because that's a lot of border. I get it. I understand it. We understand. Especially if there's a firefight happening, or because I foresee that happening. And God, I hope not, but it could happen. And the drones will come in handy. I get it. That's okay. I understand. But to just pick a city and just
Mm-hmm.
surveillance your people, not okay.
And
So I mean, there's a right way and a wrong
And then you
way.
add to that the whole Marines getting pushed in to support the National Guard in Los Angeles against violent protesting that really wasn't violent until the Trump administration showed up. You have the
The
federalization.
specialized
Well, I
units.
haven't gotten there yet. You have federalization.
Oh, I'm sorry. I got
Yeah,
excited.
you got the federalization of the DC police and the flooding of DC with National Guard troops who are now armed, by the way, which means that we
Mhm.
could have a potential for a Kent State situation in the Trump
Which we
administration.
predicted would happen. For
It's just part and parcel to what's going on, right? And I'm trying not to be partisan, but at the same time, folks, listen, there's nonpartisan and then there's silence. And at some point you have to say, listen, I'm going to put my nonpartisan beliefs to the side because what is going on right now is nonpartisan. What is going on right now is that our rights are being infringed upon. What is going on right now is that we are slowly watching the degradation of our constitutional rights. And the MAGA side is cheering it. So at the end of the day, we have to know, like, we learned our history last week. We reviewed kind of what's going on this week, because what's going on in our society, what's going on in our country is such baloney when it comes to our constitutional rights, and we're just allowing it to happen. We cannot allow it to happen. So it's important for us to know what's going on so that we can be aware of it, so that we can counter it. So, with that being said, next week we're going to talk about what the future potentially looks like. And we're going to look at some scenarios that could pop up, and we're going to examine what those scenarios could look like and what the future of the American right to protest and the American freedom of speech could look like in the next 5 to 10 years. Until next week, stay informed
Stay engaged.
and always color outside the lines.